The silence in the grand arena was the kind that made your skin crawl. 50,000 beings from across the galaxy sat in their seats, but nobody dared to make a sound. They all knew what was coming. They all knew who was coming. Zekthar, the Void Reaper, was about to fight again. The arena floor was a simple metal circle, 30 feet wide, surrounded by energy walls that glowed blue in the dim light. There were no fancy decorations, no special effects. When Zekthar fought, he liked things simple. He wanted his enemies to have nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, and nothing to help them dot in the betting booths around the arena. The odds boards showed the same thing they always showed when Zekthar fought. The alien's name was listed at 1 to 100. His opponent, whoever it would be, was listed at 100 to 1. Nobody ever bet against Zekthar. It was like throwing money into a fire. Station Commander Vexal, a tall blue-skinned Altarian, stood in the control room high above the arena floor. He watched the crowd through the thick glass windows and felt sick to his stomach. In 20 years of running fighting matches on Nexus Prime, he had never seen anything like what Zekthar did to his opponents. The reptilian fighter was 8 feet tall and covered in black scales that seemed to eat light. His forearms moved like deadly snakes, each one ending in claws that could cut through steel. His eyes were yellow with black slits down the middle, like a snake's eyes, and when he looked at you, it felt like he was deciding which piece of you to eat first. But the worst thing about Zekthar was not how he looked. It was how he fought. He did not just try to win his matches. He tried to break his opponents in every way possible. He would hurt them slowly, making them scream, making them beg, making them wish they had never been born. The crowd loved it. They came from all over the galaxy to watch Zekthar turn brave, warriors into crying children. Vexal had tried to stop the matches many times. He had sent reports to the Galactic Council, asking them to ban Zekthar from fighting. But the Council always said the same thing. The fighting circuits were legal. If beings wanted to fight, they could fight. If they wanted to bet on fights, they could bet. And if they wanted to watch other beings get hurt, well, that was their choice too. The truth was that the fighting circuits were more than just entertainment. They were politics. When two species had problems with each other, sometimes they would settle things in the arena instead of going to war. A victory in the arena could mean trade deals, territory rights, or protection agreements. A loss could mean your entire species got pushed around by stronger neighbors. That was why Zekthar was so dangerous. He did not just represent himself when he fought. He represented the entire Krekstar Empire, one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Every time he won a match, his people got stronger. Every time he broke an opponent, another. Species learned to be afraid of the Krekstar, and Zekthar had never lost. Not once in 15 years. Not once in 312 matches. The arena speakers crackled to life, and Vexal's voice echoed through the massive space. "Citizens of the galaxy," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Welcome to Nexus Prime. Tonight we have a special match. The champion of the Krekstar Empire, Zekthar the Void Reaper, will face a challenger from a species that has never fought in our arena before." The crowd began to murmur. A new species was always exciting, especially if they were stupid enough to face Zekthar. Most beings in the galaxy had heard stories about the Void Reaper. Most were smart enough to stay away. Vexal continued his announcement. "The challenger comes from a small planet called Earth, in a system far from here. Their species calls themselves humans." The murmuring got louder. Nobody in the arena had ever heard of humans before. They were not part of the Galactic Trade Federation. They were not members of any major alliance. They were nobody special, just another small species from a backwater planet in the fighter preparation rooms beneath the arena. Zekthar sat on a metal bench, sharpening his claws with a stone. He had been doing this for an hour, even though his claws were already sharp enough to cut through armor. The sound of stone on claw made a horrible scraping noise that echoed through the halls. His trainer, a smaller Krekstar named Hexik, stood nearby and watched nervously. Hexi had been with Zethar for 10 years, and he had never seen his fighter lose control. But lately, something had been wrong. Zethar was getting more violent, more cruel. His last 3 opponents had died in the arena, even though the rule said fighters should try to avoid killing each other. "Master," Hexik said quietly, "perhaps you should know something about this human species." Zethar did not look up from his claws. What is there to know? They are weak. They are small. They will die. But master, I have been reading about them. They are ... different. Now Zethar looked up, his yellow eyes focusing on his trainer. Different how? Hexik shifted uncomfortably. They fight wars, master. Big wars. They fight each other, and they fight other species. They have been fighting for thousands of years, and they do not seem to care much about dying. Zethar laughed, a sound like breaking glass. All species fight wars, fool. All species think they are brave. But when they face me, they remember what fear really means. Yes, master, of course, master. But Hexik was not convinced. He had read the reports about humans that had been smuggled out of their space. These beings were strange. They did things that made no sense. They would throw themselves into impossible battles just to save their friends. They would fight enemies much stronger than themselves and somehow find ways to win. And strangest of all, some of them seemed to enjoy danger. The arena speakers crackled again. Fighters, prepare for battle. The match will begin in 5 minutes. Zethar stood up, all 8 feet of him unfolding like a nightmare. His forearms stretched and flexed, showing off muscles that could crush steel. His claws caught the light and threw it back in sharp, deadly flashes. Time to teach these humans their place, he said, walking toward the fighter entrance. Above them, 50,000 beings held their breath. They were about to see something that had never happened before. They were about to see what happened when the scariest fighter in the galaxy met his first human opponent. None of them were prepared for what they were about to witness. The prison cell on Europa was cold and gray, just like every other day for the past 6 months. Danny Sullivan sat on his narrow bed, doing push-ups on his knuckles against the metal floor. 150, 151, 150-2. The guards had stopped trying to figure out why he exercised so much. They had stopped trying to figure out a lot of things about Danny Sullivan. In a prison full of dangerous soldiers, Danny was the one that even the guards were afraid of. It was not because he was big. Danny was average height, maybe 5 feet 10 inches, with brown hair and green eyes. He looked like a regular guy you might see working at a store or fixing cars. But there was something in those green eyes that made people nervous. Something that said he did not care about the same things other people cared about, like staying alive. Danny finished his push-ups and sat up, wiping sweat from his face with his shirt. The cell was small, just a bed, a toilet, and a tiny window that showed the frozen surface of Jupiter's moon. He had been staring out that window for 6 months, ever since the court-martial that put him here. The charges were simple: disobeying direct orders, endangering his unit, reckless behavior in combat. What the charges did not say was that Danny had saved 37 people by doing exactly what his commanding officer told him not to do. During the Battle of Titan, Danny's unit had been pinned down by alien raiders. The enemy had been trapped in a narrow canyon with no way out. The lieutenant ordered everyone to stay put and wait for backup. Danny had looked at the situation and decided that backup would arrive too late. Half his friends would be dead by So Danny Sullivan did what Danny Sullivan always did. He grabbed his rifle and ran straight at the enemy position, screaming at the top of his lungs. The aliens had been so surprised by the crazy human charging at them that they forgot about the other soldiers for a few seconds. That was all the time Danny's unit needed to escape the trap. Danny kept the aliens busy for 3 hours, using nothing but broken equipment and his bare hands after his rifle ran out of ammunition. When backup finally arrived, they found Danny sitting on top of a pile of dead aliens, humming an old song and trying to stop the bleeding from a dozen wounds. He waved at the rescue team like he had just finished mowing his lawn. The court-martial board did not know what to do with him. They could not give him a medal because he had disobeyed orders. They could not throw him out of the military because he was too good at his job. So they stuck him in prison and hoped he would learn to follow rules. Danny did not mind prison. It was quiet, and nobody bothered him much. The other prisoners had heard stories about what he did during the war. They knew he was the kind of person who would fight 30 aliens by himself just because it seemed like the right thing to do. Most of them decided to leave him alone. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Danny look up from his book. Heavy boots, more than one person, and they were coming his way. That was unusual. The guards usually left him alone, except for meal. Time and exercise. The cell door opened, and 3 people walked in. Danny recognized the first one immediately. Commander Jake Morrison had been his commanding officer before the court-martial. Jake was a good man, the kind of officer who cared more about his soldiers than about his career. That was probably why he was still just a commander after 20 years in the service. Behind Jake were 2 people Danny did not know. A woman in a fancy suit who looked like she worked for the government, and a man in a military uniform with more medals than Danny had ever seen on one person. "Hello, Danny," Jake said, sitting down on the small chair next to the bed. "How are you doing?" Danny shrugged. "Not bad. Food is terrible, but the company is quiet. What brings you all the way out to Jupiter?" Jake looked uncomfortable. "We need to talk to you about something. Something important. I am listening." The woman in the suit stepped forward. "Mr. Sullivan, my name is Lisa Grant. I work for the State Department. We have a situation that requires someone with your particular skills." Danny raised an eyebrow. "My particular skills? You mean getting in trouble and disobeying orders?" "We mean," said the man with all the medals, "your ability to fight impossible battles and somehow win." Jake leaned forward. "Danny, humanity just got invited to join something called the Galactic Trade Federation. It is a big deal, really big. We would get access to new technology, new planets, new resources. It could change everything for our species." "Sounds great," Danny said. "What does that have to do with me?" Lisa Grant pulled out a tablet and showed Danny a picture. It was the ugliest thing he had ever seen. 8 feet tall, black scales, 4 arms, claws like knives, and eyes that looked like they belonged on a snake. "This is Zekthar, the Void Reaper," she said. "He is the champion fighter for one of the most powerful alien empires in the galaxy. To join the Federation, we have to prove that humanity deserves a place at the table. That means sending someone to fight him." Danny looked at the picture for a long moment. "He looks mean." "He has never lost a fight," Jake said. "Never. In 15 years, he has killed or crippled over 300 opponents. Most species will not even send fighters to face him anymore. But we have to," Lisa said. "If we do not send someone, or if our fighter loses, humanity gets banned from the Federation forever. We get cut off from the rest of the galaxy." Danny handed the tablet back to her. "So you want me to fight this thing?" "We want you to represent the human race," the man with the medal said. "Your sentence would be reduced to time served. Full pardon. You could go back to active duty. Danny was quiet for a minute, thinking. Then he smiled, and all three visitors felt a chill run down their backs. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been offered the most dangerous job in the galaxy and was already looking forward to it. "When do we leave?" Danny asked. Jake stared at him. "That is it? No questions about the alien? No worries about the fight? No concerns about representing all of humanity?" Danny shrugged again. "He looks tough, but everything looks tough until you punch it in the face. Besides, what is the worst that could happen? I die? I was probably going to die anyway. Might as well make it interesting." Lisa Grant and the General exchanged worried looks. They had come here looking for a fighter who could save humanity's future. Instead, they had found a man who talked about death like other people talked about the weather. But Jake Morrison smiled. He had served with Danny Sullivan for 3 years. He knew that behind the casual attitude and the jokes about dying was the most dangerous human being he had ever met. Not because Danny was big or strong or fast, but because Danny Sullivan was the only person Jake had ever known who was completely, absolutely, utterly unafraid of anything. "We leave tomorrow," Jake said. "The fight is in 1 week." Danny nodded and went back to his book. "Sounds good. Mind if I finish this chapter first? It is just getting to the good part." As the 3 visitors left the cell, none of them noticed that Danny had not asked a single question about his opponent. He had not asked about Sekthar's fighting style, his weapons, his weaknesses, or his strengths. Danny Sullivan was going to fight the scariest alien in the galaxy, and he was treating it like a trip to the grocery store. Outside the cell, Lisa Grant grabbed Jake's arm. "Are you sure about this? He seems ... crazy?" Jake finished. "Yeah, he is. But he is also the only human being who has a chance against that thing. Trust me, Jake was right." But none of them understood why Danny had a chance. They thought it was because he was a good fighter. They did not realize that Danny's real weapon was not his skill or his strength. It was the fact that he genuinely did not care if he lived or died. And that made him the most dangerous opponent Seekthar the Void Reaper had ever faced. The transport ship arrived at Nexus Prime 3 days later. Danny Sullivan stood at the window, looking out at the massive space station. It was the biggest thing he had ever seen, like a metal city floating in space. Lights blinked everywhere, and ships moved in and out like busy insects. "Impressive, is it not?" Jake Morrison said, walking up beside him. Danny nodded. "Big. Must take a lot of people to keep it running." During the 3-day trip, Jake had tried to prepare Danny for what he was about to face. He had shown him videos of Sekthar's fighting, explained the aliens' techniques, and gone over possible strategies. Danny had listened politely, but Jake could tell he was not really paying attention. Instead, Danny spent most of his time doing exercises and reading books. He read everything from science fiction novels to poetry. When Jake asked him why he was not more worried about the fight, Danny just smiled and said he would figure it out when he got there. Now they were docking at Nexus Prime, and Danny seemed as calm as if he were visiting his grandmother. The docking bay was huge and filled with beings from all over the galaxy. Danny saw tall blue aliens with 4 eyes, short fuzzy creatures that walked on 6 legs, and things that looked like walking trees. None of them paid much attention to the humans, except to point and whisper. "They are staring," Jake said quietly. "Let them stare," Danny replied. "I have never seen aliens before either." A group of station officials met them at the airlock. The leader was tall and blue with skin that looked like it was made of metal. His name was Commander Vexal, and he did not look happy to see them. "You are the human fighters?" Vexal asked, looking Danny up and down with disappointment. "Fighter," Jake corrected. Just one. This is Danny Sullivan. Vexal stared at Danny for a moment. Danny was wearing simple clothes and carrying a small bag. He looked like a tourist, not a warrior who was about to face the most dangerous fighter in the galaxy. This is your champion? Vexal asked. This small human? Danny stepped forward with a friendly smile. Nice to meet you too. When do I get to see this Zekthar guy everyone is so worried about? The other station officials looked at each other, nervously. They had expected the human to be scared, or at least serious. Instead, he was acting like he was here for a vacation. Vexal led them through the station toward the fighter quarters. The halls were crowded with aliens of every shape and size. Word had spread that a human was going to fight Zekthar, and everyone wanted to get a look at the crazy being who thought he could survive 5 minutes with the Void Reaper. Most of them were disappointed. Annie looked ordinary. He waved at the crowd like he was in a parade. Some of the aliens laughed. Others shook their heads sadly, thinking the human had no idea what he was getting into. They passed through the betting areas where hundreds of wonders. Aliens were placing wagers on the fight. The odds board still showed the same numbers they always showed for Zekthar fights. 100 to 1 against the challenger. Nobody was betting on the human. Your people do not seem very confident. Vexal said to Jake. They do not know Danny, Jake replied. The fighter quarters were deep in the station, away from the crowds and noise. Each fighter got a small room with a bed, a desk, and a training area. Danny looked around his room and nodded approvingly. Not bad. Better than my cell on Europa. Vexal left them alone, and Jake sat down on the single chair. Danny, we need to talk about tomorrow. What about it? The fight. You are going to be facing something that has killed 300 beings. Do you understand what that means? Danny sat on the bed and started taking off his shoes. It means he has had a lot of practice. But so have I. This is not a joke, Danny. If you lose, humanity gets cut off from the rest of the galaxy forever. No trade, no technology, no contact. We stay alone on Earth while everyone else moves forward. Danny looked at Jake seriously for the first time since they had left Europa. I know what the stakes are, Commander. I also know that worrying about it will not help me win the fight. So what is your plan? Danny shrugged. Go out there tomorrow and see what happens. Plans are great until someone punches you in the face. Then you just have to react. Jake stared at him. That is it? That is your entire strategy? Pretty much. Look, Commander, I have read the files you gave me. I have watched the videos. This Zekthar guy is big, fast, strong, and mean. He has 4 arms and claws that can cut metal. He is probably smarter than me, and definitely more experienced. So how do you expect to win? Danny smiled that cold smile that made people nervous. Who says I expect to win? I just expect to fight. Win or lose, I am going to make sure he remembers it. That night, Jake could not sleep. He lay in his bed in the room next to Danny's, listening to the sounds of the station. Through the thin walls, he could hear Danny moving around. At first, Jake thought Danny was having trouble sleeping too. Then he realized what the sounds were not. Danny was doing exercises. Push-ups, sit-ups, stretches. The same routine he did every night in prison. Jake looked at his watch. It was 3 a.m, and Danny was getting ready for what might be the last day of his life by doing push-ups. The next morning, Jake found Danny in the small cafeteria, eating breakfast and reading a book. He looked completely relaxed, like he was getting ready for a day at the beach instead of a fight to the death. How did you sleep? Jake asked, sitting down with his own breakfast. Good, you? Not so good. I kept thinking about the fight. Danny closed his book and looked at Jake. Commander, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you really come to get me? There are other fighters in the military. Stronger guys, faster guys, guys with more training. Why me? Jake was quiet for a moment. Because you are the only one who would say yes. Come on. Any soldier would take this mission if ordered. That is just it, Danny. We could not order someone to do this. It had to be a volunteer. And when we looked at all the possible volunteers, you were the only one who would not just say yes, but actually mean it. Danny nodded slowly. Because I do not care if I die. Because you are not afraid to die. There is a difference. Is there? Jake leaned forward. Danny, I have watched you fight. I have seen you do impossible things. Not because you want to die, but because you are not limited by the fear of death. That makes you dangerous in ways that bigger, stronger fighters never could be. Danny finished his breakfast and stood up. Well, I guess we will find out soon enough. As they walked toward the arena, Jake noticed something he had not seen before. Other fighters were in the halls, aliens of different species who were scheduled for matches later in the week. When they saw Danny, they stepped aside, not out of respect, but out of something else. They were afraid of him, not because he looked dangerous, not because he was big or obviously strong. They were afraid because Danny Sullivan walked through the halls of Nexus Prime like a man who had already accepted death. And any being who was not afraid to die was capable of anything. The arena was filling up. 50,000 beings from across the galaxy were taking their seats, all excited to see the human get destroyed by Zekthar, the Void Reaper. None of them realized they were about to see something that would change their understanding of what it meant to be human. The roar of 50,000 aliens shook the entire arena as Danny Sullivan walked through the fighter entrance. The noise was so loud, it felt like standing inside a thunderstorm. Danny looked up at the crowd and waved like he was meeting old friends at a barbecue. The arena floor was exactly what he had expected. A simple metal circle, 30 feet across, surrounded by energy walls that hummed with power. No fancy decorations, no special effects, just a plain fighting pit where one being would win and another would lose. Danny rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck. He had been sitting in that transport ship for 3 days, and his muscles felt stiff. He did a few quick stretches, completely ignoring the thousands of eyes watching his every move dot in the crowd. Aliens pointed at him and talked in excited voices. Most of them were laughing. The human looked so ordinary, so small compared to what they were used to seeing in the arena. Some of them had bet money on how long he would last. The longest guess was 2 minutes. Commander Vexal's voice echoed through the arena speakers. Citizens of the galaxy, presenting the challenger. From the planet Earth, representing the human species, Danny Sullivan. The crowd cheered, but it was not the kind of cheering you heard for a hero. It was the kind of cheering you heard at a circus when the clowns came out. They thought Danny was entertainment, something funny to watch before the real show started. Danny did not seem to mind. He walked to the center of the arena and stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking around like a tourist seeing the sights. Then the opposite entrance opened, and the cheering stopped. Zekthar the Void Reaper stepped into the arena, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was even bigger than the pictures had shown. 8 feet of black scales and rippling muscle. His 4 arms moved slowly, showing off claws that caught the arena lights and threw them back in sharp, deadly flashes. The alien crowd fell completely silent. Even though they had seen Zekthar fight before, his presence still filled them with fear. He moved like a predator, like something that was born to kill. His yellow eyes swept across the arena until they found Danny. And then they locked on like weapon sights. Danny looked back at him with mild interest, like he was studying an unusual animal at the zoo. Zekthar began his usual pre-fight routine. He circled around Danny slowly, all four arms weaving patterns. In the air, his claws made soft clicking sounds as they moved. This was psychological warfare, designed to break his opponent's mind before the fighting even started. Most fighters would be backing away by now, looking for escape routes, sweating, with fear. Danny just stood in the center of the circle and watched Zekthar move around him. "You are the human?" Zekthar asked, his voice like gravel being crushed. "That is what they tell me," Danny replied. "You must be Zek. Nice to meet you." The casual tone confused Zekthar. No opponent had ever talked to him like they were having a normal conversation. "Do you know who I am, little human?" "Sure. You are the guy I'm supposed to fight." "Ready when you are." Zekthar stopped circling and stared at Danny. In 15 years of fighting, he had never met an opponent who showed no fear at all. Even the bravest warriors had shown some sign of nervousness. Faster breathing, tense muscles, dilated pupils. Something Danny Sullivan showed nothing. He might as well have been waiting for a bus. "I have killed 300 fighters," Zekthar said, trying a different approach. "I have broken bones, torn flesh, spilled blood across this arena floor. Your species is new to this galaxy. You do not understand what you are facing." Danny nodded thoughtfully. 300, huh? That is a lot. Must get boring after a while." The comment hit Zekthar like a slap in the face. Boring? His fights were legendary across the galaxy. Beings traveled for months just to watch him destroy his opponents. How dare the small human call his victories boring? The arena announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Fighters ready. Begin." Zekthar launched himself forward with a roar that would have made a dragon proud. His four arms moved in perfect coordination, claws slashing through the air where Danny's head had been a split second before. But Danny was no longer there. He had stepped to the side at the last possible moment, so close that Zekthar's claws cut through his shirt without touching skin. "Fast," Danny said, sounding impressed. "But you telegraph your moves pretty badly." Zekthar spun around, all four arms sweeping in wide arcs designed to cut anything within 6 feet of him. Danny ducked under the first two arms, jumped over the third, and caught the fourth arm by the wrist. For a moment, human and alien were frozen in place, staring at each other. Then Danny smiled and headbutted Zekthar directly in the face. The sound of the impact echoed through the silent arena. Zekthar staggered backward, green blood running from his nose. Danny wiped blood from his own forehead, where it had split open against Zekthar's hard skull. "That hurt," Danny said cheerfully. "This is going to be fun." The crowd erupted. In 312 fights, no one had ever made Zekthar bleed in the first exchange. The betting boards began flashing as odds shifted for the first time. In years, Zekthar touched the blood on his face and stared at it in disbelief. Then he looked at Danny with something new in his yellow eyes. For the first time in his fighting career, Zekthar the Void Reaper was facing an opponent who had hurt him and seemed happy about it. The real fight was just beginning. Zekthar attacked again, this time using the full range of his combat training. He moved like liquid death, his four arms working together in combinations that had destroyed some of the strongest fighters in the galaxy. His claws cut through the air so fast they made whistling sounds. Danny did not try to avoid all the attacks. He could not. Zekthar was too fast, too skilled, and had too many weapons. Instead, Danny did something that shocked everyone watching. He walked straight into the attack. Claws raked across his chest, tearing his shirt and leaving deep cuts in his skin. Another claw caught him across the shoulder, spinning him halfway around. A third claw slashed his arm from elbow to wrist. Any normal fighter would have been finished. The pain alone should have dropped Danny to his knees. Instead, he grabbed, two of Zekthar as arms and held on. "My turn," Danny said. He drove his knee up into Zekthar's stomach with enough force to lift the 8-foot alien off the ground. While Zekthar was gasping for breath, Danny twisted both captured arms and threw the alien over his shoulder. Zekthar hit the arena floor hard, rolled, and came up in a crouch. He was breathing heavily now, and there was something in his eyes that had never been there before. Fear. Not much, just a flicker, but it was there. For the first time in his life, Zekthar the Void Reaper was fighting someone who seemed to get stronger when he got hurt. Danny wiped blood from his face and grinned. "Come on, Zek. I thought you were supposed to be scary." The crowd was going crazy. They had come to see a human get destroyed, and instead they were watching the impossible. Danny Sullivan was not just surviving against Zekthar. He was fighting back, and he was enjoying it. In the VIP section, Commander Vexal turned to Jake Morrison. "What is wrong with your human?" Jake smiled for the first time since arriving at Nexus Prime. Nothing is wrong with him. That is exactly the problem. Down in the arena, Danny and Zekthar circled each other again. But this time, it was different. This time, Zekthar was the one who looked worried. Danny had found something that no other fighter in the galaxy possessed. He had found the one thing that could defeat the power of fear. Complete and total fearlessness. Blood covered both fighters now. Danny's shirt hung in tatters, and cuts crisscrossed his chest and arms like a road map of pain. But he was still standing, still smiling, still moving forward, like the injuries meant nothing to him. Zekthar was breathing hard. Green blood dripped from his nose and a split lip. His left arm hung lower than the others, injured when Danny had twisted it during their last exchange. For the first time in 15 years, the Void Reaper was losing a fight. Crowd had gone from laughing to cheering to stunned silence. They were watching something impossible. A small human was not just surviving against their champion, he was winning. "Getting tired, Zek?" Danny asked, wiping blood from his eyes. "We can take a break if you need one." The casual conversation during Mortal Kombat was driving Zekthar crazy. No one talked during fights. Fighting was serious business, a matter of life and death. Yet this human treated it like a friendly game. Zekthar roared and charged again. But this time, Danny was ready. He had been watching the alien's patterns, learning his moves. When Zekthar's top arms swept down, Danny rolled under them. When the bottom arms came up, Danny was already inside their reach. He grabbed Zekthar around the waist and drove his shoulder into the alien's stomach. Both fighters crashed to the arena floor, rolling and struggling for position. Zekthar's claws raked across Danny's back, but Danny held on like his life depended on it. Actually, his life did depend on it. But Danny did not seem to care about that part. They separated and climbed to their feet. Zekthar was moving slower now, favoring his injured arm. Danny looked like he had been put through a meat grinder, but his green eyes were bright with excitement. "This is the most fun I have had in months," Danny said. "You are pretty good at this." Zekthar stared at him in disbelief. Fun? The human thought this was fun? Zekthar had torn huge chunks out of Danny's skin, and the human was enjoying himself? That was when Zekthar realized something terrible. His greatest weapon had always been fear. He broke his opponents mentally before he broke them physically. But Danny Sullivan felt no fear. Worse than that, Danny seemed to be having the time of his life. For the first time in his career, Zekthar the Void Reaper was afraid. He decided to end the fight quickly, before this strange human could do any more damage. Zekthar had one finishing move that he saved for special occasions. It was dangerous for him to use, because it left him exposed, but it had never failed to end a fight. Zekthar roared and leaped high into the air, all four arms spread wide. He came down like a falling star, claws aimed at Danny's head and heart. If the attack connected, it would cut the human into pieces. Danny did not try to dodge. He did not try to block. Instead, he did something that no one in the arena expected. He stepped forward to meet the attack. Zekthar's claws punched deep into Danny's chest and shoulder, but Danny's forward movement carried him inside the alien's guard. Before Zekthar could pull his claws free, Danny wrapped his arms around the alien and held on tight. "Got you," Danny said through gritted teeth. With Zekthar's weapons literally stuck inside him, Danny began hitting the alien with short, brutal punches. Uppercuts to the stomach, elbow strikes to the ribs, headbutts to the face. Each blow was powered by muscles that did not care about the claws piercing his body. Zekthar tried to pull away, but Danny held on with a grip strengthened by complete disregard for his own safety. The alien's claws were doing terrible damage, but Danny ignored the pain and kept punching. The crowd watched in horrified fascination. They had seen many brave fighters over the years, but they had never seen anything like this. Danny Sullivan was letting himself be stabbed just so he could hit his opponent. Zekthar's struggles grew weaker. The constant pounding was taking its toll. His vision blurred, and his legs began to shake. He had never been hit so many times by someone who refused to let go. Finally, Zekthar's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. Danny let go and staggered backward, the alien's claws sliding out of his body with wet, horrible sounds. Danny looked down at Zekthar, who was unconscious and breathing heavily. Then he sat down hard on the arena floor and put his hand over the worst of his wounds. "Good. Fight," he said to the unconscious alien. "You almost had me there." Medical teams rushed onto the arena floor from both sides. Danny waved them away from himself and pointed to Zekthar. "Take care of him first," Danny said. "He fought well. He deserves proper medical attention." The alien medical team stared at Danny in shock. He had just defeated their champion in the most brutal fight any of them had ever seen, and his first concern was making sure his opponent got help. The human medical team reached Danny and began working on his wounds. There were too many to count, and some of them were deep enough to be life-threatening, but Danny stayed conscious and alert. "How do you feel?" the lead medic asked. "Tired," Danny admitted. "But good, really good." The arena was erupting in noise. Aliens were cheering, arguing, and trying to process what they had just witnessed. The betting boards had crashed because no one knew how to calculate odds for something that had never happened before. In the VIP section, Commander Vexau turned to Jake Morrison with a stunned expression. "Your human defeated Zekthar the Void." "Reaper, yes," Jake said, grinning widely. "He did. How?" Jake thought about it for a moment. "Because Zekthar spent 15 years learning how to fight people who were afraid to die. He never learned how to fight someone who was not afraid of anything." News of the fight spread across the galaxy within hours. The story was not just that humanity's representative had won, but how he had won. Danny Sullivan became known as the human who made the galaxy's scariest fighter afraid. More importantly, humanity earned a reputation that opened doors throughout the galaxy. Other species began to see humans not as primitive newcomers, but as being so fundamentally different that they might be more dangerous than anyone had realized. 3 days later, Jake visited Danny in the station medical center. Danny was sitting up in bed, covered in bandages, but looking cheerful. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked. "Not bad. The doctors say I will be fine in a few weeks. They seem pretty impressed that I am still alive." "Danny, you know what you did, right? You saved humanity's future. We are being welcomed into the Galactic Trade Federation with full privileges. Earth is going to have access to technology and resources we never dreamed of." Danny nodded. "That is good. I am glad it worked out. So what do you want to do now?" You could have any assignment you want, any rank you want. You are a hero. Danny was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the stars. I want to go back to active duty. Regular patrol duty, nothing fancy. Put me wherever you need someone who is not afraid of dangerous assignments. Jake smiled. Why am I not surprised? Because you know me, Commander. I am not a hero. I am just a guy who is not afraid of things other people are afraid of. And in a galaxy full of dangerous things, that might actually be useful. Danny Sullivan returned to Earth 6 weeks later with a full pardon and a promotion he did not particularly want. He requested assignment to the most dangerous patrol routes available, not because he wanted to die, but because he knew that was where he could do the most good after all. When you are not afraid of anything, why not put yourself between danger and the people who are afraid? In the final report filed by Commander Morrison, he noted that humanity's greatest weapon might not be their technology or their numbers, but their occasional production of individuals who are too stubborn to know when they are supposed to lose. Galaxy was still trying to figure out what that meant.